Aloha, mahalo, everyone present here this evening. We have come from all walks of life, but I would like to believe that we here at this moment are one body and one spirit and one voice, here to come and show honor and respect and pay tribute to our late Senator Daniel K. Inouye. He has brought so much joy into our lives, and we are here to say mahalo. Now, you can hear the taiko drums beating, and also the conch shell blowing. And Kauai calls. Calls its native son home. Home to our precious garden island, where once in 1899, Dan's grandparents, Mr. Asakichi and Mrs. Moyo Inouye, with their son, Hyotaro, who was only 4 years old, stepped upon this soil, the rich soil, the red dirt as we know, and Waihawa Camp 2. And so life began right here, and we would like to welcome back home Dan K. Inouye. Now, I would like to just touch upon some personal things that I have shared and experienced. But going back again, I ponder about my uncle, 4 years old, Uncle Hyotaro, coming to Kauai, and my grandparents had left 2 daughters back in Fukuoka, Yokoyama Yamehun, and one, the daughter, with my mother, Mrs. Shizue Inouye Tokushiki. Now, some personal notes. Growing up, I would say a little child of 5, I did not know Dan, but by his name only. I would hear my mother saying, Ken-chan, Ken-chan, Ken-chan. Ken-chan's a good boy. And you know, he's going to be a doctor when he grows up. And whenever I heard my mother say, Ken-chan, I knew by the tone of her voice that she was so fond of him, so proud of him. And so I said, now I want to know who this Ken-chan is. And 2 years later, when I was 7 years old, this was in 1938, my mother and I traveled by steamship to Oahu. I'll never forget that voyage. We were in steerage class, and everybody was sick down there. But I was happy when we got to 2332 Coin Street, where my grandmother Moyo lived. Mother had come to take care of her because she was gravely ill, and we could spend the summer. And one day, a boy drops in to visit his grandmother, and I hear Grandma saying, Ken-chan, and my mother saying, Ken-chan. So I looked up and saw his face, and I said, oh, so this is Ken-chan. And my mother calling me, Kiku, this is your cousin, Ken-chan. And Ken-chan gave me a smile, and I got so bashful. I remember hiding my face behind my mother's skirt. And this smile has been with me from that period on till today. Because whenever he came to Kauai or visited me somewhere else, he had that smile that told me that he cared about me and he loved me. And just a feeling was mutual. Now, that was in 1938. So 3 years later, the war broke out on Pearl Harbor, and history goes on. So we found out what had happened to Ken John. And at that time already, I think I got to know him as Dan. I'm not too sure. But after the war, he came home a hero. And I remember he stayed at our place for a couple of nights. And this was in 1948. I was a junior at Waimea High School. And we had a good talk. He loved music. He asked me to sing Mona Lisa, which I did. And he showed me his amputated right arm. And I put on a sad face. And he looked at me and he said, "Gladys, I can still play my piano." So I gave him a smile. I was happy. That was 1948. So periods passed, and I was a graduating senior in 1953. I was attending Western Michigan University in Kalamazoo. And Dan had just graduated from George Washington University in 1953. And he, with Maggie and Andy Kamacham, drove down into Michigan and came to Kalamazoo. How in the world he remembered where I was, I don't know. But he found my dormitory and came and greeted me and said, "Gladys, we're going to have Chinese. Pick the restaurant." And that wasn't hard for me to do because we only had one Chinese restaurant in Kalamazoo. So anyway, we did go. We had a real good dinner, and that was a treat for me because you know what dorm food is like. The next morning, he, Maggie, and Auntie Kamicha was driving into Battle Creek, the place of Kellogg's cereal. But no, he was going to stop by at Percy Jones Army Hospital. He needed to go there, he told me, because he was well taken care of there at Percy Jones. And I know what that hospital looked like because I used to drive into Battle Creek and saw that Army hospital. Then I realized, oh, so this is where he stayed for almost 2 years. So he thanked them and headed back home to Hawaii. And that was 1953. Hawaii was not a state, but in 1959, when we became a state, but before being a state, I think he was involved in a territorial legislature. So he was pretty busy doing that. And when Hawaii became a state, he started his courageous journey to Washington and became a House of Representatives, and in 1963, a United States Senator. And the story goes on, 1963, 64, he comes to Kauai and says, "Gladys, I'm going to visit your classroom. What grade do you have?" "I have 4th graders." "Okay." So he comes and visits and talks with my students. And my students were so entranced that the United States Senator is right there talking to them. And he tells them the importance of growing up to be good citizens and to study hard and do the best that they can do. And he went around and shook every child's hand. The next morning, a bright-eyed young boy, and I would like to mention his name, Carl Furutani. He comes up to me and says, "Mrs. Okada, I didn't wash my hands at all last night." And I asked him, "Oh, why not? It must be dirty." And he said, "No way, it's not dirty. Senator Inouye shook my hands, and I'm not going to wash it for a while." So then I told Dan that story and said what an impact he had made on these young fourth graders. Too bad one coach wasn't in my class then. He came later. So that was 1964. 1965, most of us teachers went back to school. The DOE ran some incentive program, and with the next step, you will have better salary. So I needed to find a place to stay for 6 weeks. And I thought, excuse me, okay, I'm going to ask my Auntie Kami if I may stay with them. And knowing Auntie Kami was a very strong woman, and you knew what she wanted, and she was very frank. So when I wrote her a letter saying, may I be with you for 6 weeks, I'm going to summer session, and she wrote me back and she said, Gladys, I'd love to have you here, but remember, you would have to do your own cooking. So I said, okay, fine, I'll be there. And 6 weeks was a wonderful time spending with my Uncle H. Hyotaro, we called him Uncle H, and Auntie Kami-chan. And I want them to know how proud his parents were of him. Night after night, Uncle H would tell me stories and then show me photos. And in the living room, there were many photos of them being in Washington, D.C. But there was one particular photo that he showed me. And he said, Kiku, he calls me by my Japanese name, Kiku, look at this picture. One would never believe that it is me. I am standing next to the President of the United States, John F. Kennedy. And so I said to him with a smile, yes, right. You know, your son remembered what you told him when he volunteered to the 442nd Regimental Combat Team. You told him, honor your country and honor your family name. So this is why you are standing next to the President of the United States, John F. Kennedy. So stories go on, but I'm saving maybe the best one for last. And this is, I don't know what year, but Dan remembered his roots because his mother also said to him, remember, you came from humble beginnings, from whence you came, whence you will be, and whence you will go. So Dan went back to his roots, back to Fukuoka, where his father and grandparents were born. It was Yokoyama Yamegon, way up north, way up in the country in the hills. As in Japanese, they would say, inaka no inaka, very, very remote. But Dan told me the story that, you know, Gladys, when I got there, the whole village came out, and we had a big celebration, and they presented me with a samurai sword. And I was so amazed because when growing up, my mother always said we were not of the samurai family, but we were peasants and farmers. Now, how in the world did Dan receive a samurai sword? Then in 1993, my fourth trip to Japan, my cousins who lived in the city, Hakata, finally consented that they would take me to visit my mother's birthplace. And so they had to find the Inouye, and they called the county office. For a couple of days, they said no, they don't know. But my cousin Kumiko, thinking, said to the clerk, well, this Inouye is related to Senator Daniel K. Inouye from Hawaii. And the clerk quickly said, hai, wakarimasu, wakarimasu. And right away, we got the right Inouye. But the next day we drove miles and miles. And I remember the high mountains because my mother always talked about the mountains and how she missed the mountains. And when we got to the Inouye's house, my cousins were waiting. And we were sat in the tatami room on the floor. And I was still pretty leery that I wonder if this is the right Inouye. But as I sat, I faced the wall, and I saw the picture of Emperor Akihito and Empress Michiko. And there, right in the same line, in the center, was a photo of my cousin Dan. I couldn't believe my eyes, because my mother always said that you will never look at the emperor. You would have to put your head down. And here, this 1993, 100 years after my mother was born, I was sitting in her house, looking up, seeing the emperor and the empress, and my cousin Dan right in the same line, in the center. So I told my husband, George, I guess we are the right house, the right Inouye's, because there were many Inouye's residing in that little village. And now, in closing, I would like to say, Dan, we appreciate all the courageous deeds you have done for us. Your journey to Washington was something that man would dream about and perhaps not be able to accomplish. But you not only walked the halls of Congress, but you walked the dark alleys, the ghettos, the city corners, street corners, and city blocks. And you flew over majestic mountains, over plains, valleys, crossed oceans, rivers to do your work. And you accomplished such a gigantic task that only a giant could do this. But we looked at you as a gentle giant. A gentle giant that gave Hawaii its salvation and gave Hawaii its second birth. So thank you, Dan, my dear cousin. I love you. And I would like to say once again, thank you for being here this evening.